Hi everyone, so today we're going to be talking about composting. There is a science around composting and I'm going to touch on that, but really what this video is about is lazy composting. So I will share how I actually create my compost in my garden. The first thing that you need when you're going to start composting is some sort of bin or area. I use these tumblers. There's pluses and minuses with them. They do have a smaller amount that they can create because of just their size. You can also use a very large trash can as long as it has drainage holes so that the water doesn't accumulate inside the compost. Or you could just segment off a portion of your yard and create a big heap, which is a great way to create a lot of compost. The second thing you have to know about composting is the ratio. So it's really like a recipe. You have to have a certain amount of carbon and nitrogen. And they say that you should have a 30-to-1 carbon and nitrogen ratio in your bins from the materials that you put in your bin. So let's talk about the materials and then we'll get into the numbers. So for any item that has less than a 30-to-1 ratio, that material, that is what we call a green material. That's going to be things like grass clippings, coffee grind, manure from, say, animals that are herbivores, and then of course your veggie scraps. Things that have a 30-to-1 or a greater than 30-to-1 ratio is what we call our brown material. That's going to be things like dead leaf or leaf litter, straw, paper products or cardboard, and then your wood chips and sawdust. Those are all the brown materials. There's many other materials and you can Google them or research them to figure out whether they're green or brown based on their carbon to nitrogen ratio. Now, we know what's green, we know what's brown. How do we do this calculation to make sure that we have a 30-to-1 ratio? So let's use an example. Let's say we're going to do grass clippings and dead leaves. So grass clippings have, let's round it to a 20-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio. And then leaf litter or dry leaves have a 60-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio. So say you use two measurements or let's say 2 buckets of grass clippings and 1 bucket of dry leaves. That's going to equal 100 to 3. It's 100 because you add up the 20 from the first grass clipping bucket, 20 from the second grass clipping bucket, and then 60 from the bucket of leaves. So that's the 100. The 3, so the 100 to 3 ratio is that you have 3 buckets. So there's 3 units of measurement here that you're doing. So if you take 100 and then divide it by 3, you're going to get that 33.333. That is that 30-to-1 ratio. It's very close. You don't have to be perfect, but you're trying to get to that 30-to-1 ratio. So that is how it's calculated. In the description, I'm going to put down all of the carbon to nitrogen ratios for each of the items that I had mentioned earlier. Now, the ones that I use mostly is for greens, I use grass clippings and veggie scraps and the dead plants or the plant debris that I have in the garden, as long as it is not in any form of disease like fungal disease, powdery mildew. You don't want to use any of those. For brown materials, I don't get a lot of leaves. I know that sounds crazy because there's trees all around me, but these are all evergreen trees, and even during the winter they don't shed a lot of leaves. So one time a year I might get a decent amount of leaves. So I don't really have that many leaves that I can use. So instead what I use, I have a lot of paper products I have a lot of cardboard product. You can use toilet paper rolls that have run out, paper towel rolls that have run out, your Amazon boxes, whatever. It is good to shred those down, whether by shredding them by hand or if you have a shredder. I have one, I absolutely love it. You'll want to shred that paper down so that it will deteriorate more quickly. The other thing that I have abundance of is wood chips. I have a very large camphor tree in the front of my house. It is very big. It's been established for a very, very long time. And during every good rainstorm or a wind blows, some of the dead branches on some of it will drop. And over a period of a month, I am constantly chipping up dead branches from the tree. In a future video, I'm going to show you the chipper, the home chipper that I use to create my mulch. I use that, the wood chips, I use that as a mulch, but I also use that in my compost bins. Now, with that being said, wood is the highest carbon to nitrogen ratio. It is 600 to 1. So back to the calculation that we did, in order for me to get enough green in here to get it to start breaking down, I have to add a significant amount of green for my wood chips to break down. And also paper is the second largest one. So unfortunately, my browns are all very heavy carbon. And in order for me to get this batch to break down, I have to add a lot of green. So I could sit down and do the calculation of how much greens I need to add to my brown wood chips, but I did do that once and it was such an incredible amount. I was like, there's no way I'm gonna be able to keep track of that. It was something like, for every 1 bucket of wood chips, I have to add like 50 buckets of green. So I took on the idea that I was going to just kind of do this lazy composting. And so what I do is I empty out my composter, one or the other. One is always in progress, the other one is being added to. So I'm always adding something to one and the other one is just breaking down. At this point, that is the one that is completely broken down and all the dirt is ready to go into my raised beds or over my fruit trees. Now, a lot of people are like, when is it already completely broken down? I don't focus too much on that. I feel like if it is broken down enough, close enough that it is starting to crumble, what I'll do is I will take it out. If there's any big pieces left, I will put them right back in, and then I will lay it into my bed. And at that point, after I've laid it into my bed, I will let it set covered with mulch for a couple of weeks just to make sure that it's not too hot. Hot does mean physical heat, but it also can mean too much nitrogen. So if I set it in my bed for a couple more weeks and the rains come down on it, it will leach and it will calm itself down a bit. And I have never had a problem with putting some semi-finished compost in my garden as, you know, a top or even mixing it in. Now let's talk about the lazy method that I use. So I'll drop in my 1 bucket of brown into my compost bin, and then over the next several weeks to even months, I take all my plant debris, put it in here, spin it. And then a couple weeks later, I might take my compost products from inside of my veggies. A lot of them I come out and dump daily, but sometimes if we're having like family over and there's a lot of it, and you know, I know that there's already a lot of green in here, or maybe it's full, I will just stick it in my freezer in a big gallon Ziploc bag and just wait for this stuff to break down before I bring that stuff out. And what you'll find is as you add that green into this carbon, it will break down super fast. The greens will break down because that carbon is so high from those wood chips, and that paper is so high that it's hot and it's really eating up all of the green material very, very quickly. So I will have, you know, a third of this bin brown, and then I will fill it completely up, stuffed where nothing else can fit in it, rotate it, and in a couple weeks it'll be back down to a third. And I'll just keep adding and adding and adding and adding, and I'll just add over a period of a couple months. And then at a point where I feel like it's kind of getting to this middle layer, I'll do one big feed again with everything. Grass clippings, veggie scraps that I've been saving up, and whatever plant debris that I need to get rid of in the garden, and I will stuff this thing completely full and rotate it and rotate it. And I usually only rotate like once a week or so. Honestly, it's whenever I walk by and think to myself, I haven't rotated that recently. And then I'll come over here and I'll rotate it. It only takes about maybe 3 to 5 turns. It's not a lot you have to do here. I honestly don't even, some people say you have to do it 10 times. I don't even do that. I mean, I'm pretty lazy with my compost. So once it has been completely filled, the way that I know if I've added too much green, which it hasn't happened to me yet, but it can. In this one right here, I think it was starting to get there because this one was created from my winter items. And so my winter items, I did have some leaves. Like I said, I do get a little bit of leaves. And so I was like, ooh, I'm gonna see if it breaks down even faster using the leaves. And so I filled this thing halfway up with leaf litter. And then, which was all the leaves for the winter, then I put in some vegetable garden scraps, like from my cabbages and my broccoli and stuff like that. And then I started adding food scraps. Just like I would here, I didn't think anything of it. I just started adding it. And I started to notice that it was very wet and it was getting a smell to it. Typically, compost doesn't have a smell, especially when the carbon's very high. It doesn't have a smell. But this one over here started to give a little bit of a scent. And I thought, oh, that means I have too much green, or it's starting to become unbalanced with the carbon, and the green is getting too high and the brown is getting too low. So all that I did to correct that is I went and I got some of my wood chips. I didn't dump a lot. I just probably took 2 big handfuls, laid it on top, and within a couple days it had no smell again. But it did actually break down a lot faster than what I expected. Now, when compost breaks down, the thing that's going to be very surprising is you're going to be adding and adding and adding, and it's almost like a disappearing act that happens inside this thing, because I will fill it all the way up, fill it all the way up, fill it all the way up. By the time this is done, it's probably only got enough compost that comes right here, which is crazy, that all of that material breaks down to such a compacted, eaten up type dirt. It's crazy to me, but it is something that you do need to be aware of so that you don't think your compost is just disappearing. And it also is good to be aware of, because if you are using this compost and you're trying to create enough compost for your bed, you do need to understand that you are going to need a lot of material, because once it has broken down, the material becomes probably about 1/3 of its original size. Once again, depends on the amount of carbon that you use, and it depends on the types of greens that you use. Some maintenance that you should know about composting, or particularly with these tumblers or even your compost pile, is it does need to be watered on occasion. If it gets too dry, it's the life that is growing inside your compost pile that's really breaking down and making all those nutrients. There's going to be worms and things in there. There's going to be bugs in there. Don't freak out. There's a ton of bugs in there. They are all breaking that stuff down, and if it gets too dry for them, they die off. So you want to keep it moist. You do not want to drench it. It does not need to be sopping wet. In fact, sopping wet doesn't allow that anaerobic material. It doesn't allow that air and oxygen in there. Another way to get that air and oxygen in there is to turn your piles. And so for a tumbler, that's very easy. We spin these, and that allows it to become aerated. If you have a garbage can that you're using, you're going to have to use a pitchfork or a shovel and get in there and really like kind of toss it, almost like, tossing your salad greens or something. you're going to want to get in there and create some aeration in the middle and in the bottom of the pile. And if you have a great big huge pile, you're going to want to get a pitchfork and you're going to want to turn it on itself. So scoop, push it to the side, scoop, push it to the side, and basically mix it up. Now, you have to do that a lot in the beginning because it really needs to get mixed up good. But then when you get further along and you've pretty much added all the greens and browns that you want to add for that particular pile, you don't have to turn it as much. In fact, I would discourage you from turning it too much because you don't want to disrupt what the microorganisms are doing inside the pile. So maybe once every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, once a minute, whenever I walk by and realize it's been a minute since I've turned my pile. So that is everything I know about composting. There's a lot of people that get super complicated and super scientific about it, and that's well and good. But I'm kind of a very, keep things simple, keep things easy. And so I like this kind of lazy way of composting. Add your browns, start adding lots and lots of greens. When you smell something that is a little funky, stop adding greens, add a little bit more browns until the smell goes away, and then let it set. It can take anywhere from 3 months to 24 months for it to be ready. But just keep checking it, and when you see that crumbly black dirt and most everything in the pile has broken down into fine, grainy type sand, or not sand really, but grainy type dirt, you're ready to go. Just put it in your beds. And if you're concerned that it is still too hot, lay it in your beds, wash it in very nicely, and wait a few weeks before you put some plants into it, and everything will be just fine. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure to hit that subscribe so that you don't miss any of my future videos.